This episode of the Leap Forward podcast is brought to you by Bridge LT, leaders in conversational learning and innovation. Through AI role plays, technical simulators, and comprehensive training programs, Bridge LT is revolutionizing the future of corporate and enterprise education.
On this episode of Leap Forward, we speak with Elliot Perks, co-founder and CEO of Jigcar and an expert in automotive logistics, as we explore tech solutions for automotive transport. Elliot discusses the problems car dealer groups encounter with managing car movement, specifically the lack of visibility, delays, and pricing issues they often face. He discusses how technology can provide solutions to these challenges, enabling real-time tracking, improved workflows, and cost control. Learn from Elliot's expertise on the evolving landscape of automotive logistics. So absolutely delighted to welcome to this edition of Leap Forward, Elliot Perks. Elliot is the CEO of Jigcar. Elliot, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you very much for having me. Great to be here.
So first of all, give us a brief introduction. Tell us a little bit about the business, the value prop, why you exist, and the role that you play.
Yeah, so Jigcar, we're basically building operational software focused on the management of transport for the automotive industry, starting with dealer groups. So what we fundamentally believe is if you move cars quickly and you move cars cost effectively, that's good for your stock turn, and obviously it reduces your operational costs. And what we find when we talk to automotive companies at the moment is they're moving a lot of cars, and it's very hard to get visibility on how many cars are moving, at what speed they're moving, and it's very hard to see if you're actually getting the right price across the group. So we've basically built the software that enables you to manage that transport operation. And we've started with dealer groups. So we now work with 8 of the AM 100 groups. We've only been in business for a year and a couple of months. So it's been a great start. And this all started, as I always say, for our sins at our time at Cazoo, where they were obviously selling tens of thousands of cars, albeit ultimately slightly unprofitably. But they really needed software to manage that process. And me and my 2 co-founders were on the software side of the business trying to solve that problem, and realized all software that exists in logistics is built for moving parcels and fast moving consumer goods. It just isn't built for moving cars. So that's what started this journey.
That's really interesting. And I wanted to kind of talk a little bit about sort of what led you to setting it up, and the Kazoo kind of point is well noted. But let's rewind right to kind of back to the beginning. Kind of give me a bit of a kind of a journey to date.
Yeah. So obviously, when we were at Kazoo, we felt this problem really deeply, and Kazoo spent hundreds of thousands of pounds on software that just wasn't working. And so I was basically in a team with my now 2 co-founders, Rupert and Jackson, and Rupert was a product designer, Jackson was a software engineer, and I was a product manager. And we were really tasked with solving this problem with a couple of other people. And it was just really hard, and we kept screaming at leadership, like, you're going to have to build this in-house. But for reasons that were completely understandable, even though they had 400 software engineers, they didn't want to build it in-house. And it seemed insane that there wasn't anything that solved this problem to them, because they'd worked at other businesses in other retail industries where you would never build your own logistics software. So understandably, we kept buying software. It wasn't working. And I think we were just talking in the pub one day after work and saying, like, maybe we should, build a business in this space or look at it. And I think Jackson, my co-founder, was like, well, I've already actually been building something in my bedroom. I think Rupert thought we were slightly nuts in even considering it. And anyway, pub chat descended into what is now our lives every single day. So yeah, about a year and a bit ago, we raised a bit of funding, about just under £750,000. So not loads. And we got our first customer, which was Glyn Hopkin. And from there, we've basically built up and started working with more AM 100 groups like Stephen Eagle, Perry's, Thurlow Nunn. And yeah, just closed actually a £3 million funding round and ready to really go after the rest of the AM100 and start looking at other sectors as well, like rental and manufacturers.
Congratulations, that's amazing. What incredible progress in such a short amount of time as well. Um, it's it is when you talk about it, sort of incredible that this product didn't exist before you built it. But in a sense, almost that validates your thesis, right? It's so often that you have these sorts of conversations. So tell us a little bit about sort of how you actually went about trying to kind of establish kind of the need. Obviously, you've had that real world experience at Kazoo, but tell us a little bit more about sort of how you found that kind of that product market fit.
Yeah, that was definitely a journey, and product market fit. I think for our first product, I think we've got it, but for the next couple of products, obviously it's gonna take some time. But the thing we really understood at Kazoo was Kazoo's problem, and the one thing we needed to know before we put our whole lives on this business was, is the Kazoo problem, like, does it map to the rest of the industry? And so we spent a lot of time speaking to other dealer groups, transport providers in the automotive space to work that out. And what we did is we basically put a prototype together in Figma. So there's no code, nothing. It was just like a designed prototype, and we took it to dealer groups and we used that to get their feedback. And their first comments were like, whoa, this is actually just completely different to how we do transport. We don't have our own trucks, we don't have our own drivers, we don't have a central transport team. And that's what our first prototype was built around. And we quickly learned that the Kazoo problem, there was still a problem in terms of managing how you move cars, but the industry moved cars in a very different way. And so through that Figma prototype, through talking to groups, I think the first two groups we spoke to were Glyn Hopkin and Stephen Eagle, who then became customers later down the line, which was quite cool. But they literally looked at our prototype and were like, that just will never work for us. So that was basically the journey, was taking a Figma prototype, learning that we were completely off the mark, and finding that the product that was needed for the industry was actually very different to the one we imagined. But the problem was there, it just needed a different solution.
That's brilliant strategy of not spending months and millions of pounds on building the tech solution that nobody wants, right? I love the fact that you went for the light touch sort of approach. You must be thanking your stars now.
Yeah, we saw that done at, I'd worked at in between Kazoo and starting Jigcar, I went to a software, another SaaS company that was scaling really quickly, and they took two approaches to building products. One where they just build it up front, and it was a problem space everyone needed to solve. But a year into having this product and they'd invested loads in it, it was doing £0 of revenue. Whereas for the next product, they were like, right, let's not do that again. Let's just do this Figma prototype thing. And before they even had a first version out, they had 500K's worth of contracts signed. And so I think we took that into our process and thought, you know what, we don't need to build anything first. Let's get the prototyping done and go from there. Sadly, we didn't end up with 500K's worth of contracts signed after our prototype, but we tried.
And looking back, what do you think, other than obviously that sort of real world sort of market feedback, what are the other kind of principles that you think really have been critical to kind of the traction and success you've had today?
Yeah, so it's a good question. I think one of the things we really try and do is remind ourselves that, fine, we understand transport quite well, but we worked at Kazoo for 2.5 years. It's not like we understand everything that happens at a dealer group every single day. So we really try and take, in every sales conversation with everyone we talk to, it's learning. It's not saying this is how you should do something or this is our view on best practice. It's really learning, like, how does your group operate? What are the nuances? What do you do every day? And we've got people around us in the team that are, a bit older, in their 50s, who have been in automotive retail their whole lives. So that really helps. But I think a lot of it is about learning and not thinking that we know the answers. It's actually, for every group, there's going to be a different answer, and we try channel that.
And describe sort of the impact that the product is having on your customers.
So there's two things we try focus on. One is reducing cost, obviously, and the other one is increasing speed. And actually, the most important thing with moving cars is speed, because it's part of the sales process. When you look at your days to sell, let's say it's 35 days, we tend to find that there's at least 3 days you can trim off that just by moving cars quicker between sites. So if we take the most critical movement is, I've sold a car from site C and the car's currently at site A. So there is a customer at site C that is ready to take that car away, that's ready to buy that car. And ultimately, if it takes me 5 days to get it there, I'm spending £30 a day in terms of the cost of holding that vehicle, in terms of stock and depreciation. And it's pretty bad for the customer experience. So we really try and hammer down speed, and then also the cost of the actual transport itself. Like, are you getting the best rates with the providers you use? Are you actually sending all your volume to one or two providers that can therefore give you better rates rather than having 50 across the group? So we try and hammer those two things down, and we're really seeing that come to fruition. So if we take Stephen Eagle, we've saved them 300k this year just on the cost of moving cars alone, before we even consider the speed of moving them, which is a day and a half quicker. So, let's say they're moving thousands of cars a year, which they are. If you trim a day and a half off that, that is thousands times £30 in terms of cost of holding stock, plus it's thousands of days in which you can then turn new stock, or gives you the opportunity. So massive impact, but it's not a sexy area. People aren't talking about it when they're looking to cut costs of transport, but we're trying to get it out there.
It's one of those classic sort of iceberg sort of the hidden cost type problems that you're solving, right?
Yeah, exactly. There hasn't been a scenario so far where we assume this is the value that could be added, and it hasn't actually been much more. But one of the things that is really hard in terms of our prospecting and our sales processes is these groups don't have a view on what they're currently spending, because it is hidden and buried in the accounts, which is because there isn't a decent software to manage it. So they don't have a view today on what the costs are, how quickly cars are moving. So it's really hard to make that value equation in the sales process. So what we try and do is say, right, listen, just trial Jigcar for a couple of months and get that view. Jigcar will give you that view, and then you can work out if you want to invest for 12 months or so. So that's how we've sort of structured it.
So you've gone for a sort of a 3-month kind of style, kind of approach to getting kind of commercial traction.
Yeah, we sort of tend to go for, in the groups that aren't really clear on what the value add is going to be, because they just don't have that visibility, we go for sort of a 2-month trial, but we have to go really across the group. We've tried doing just over a brand, but that doesn't give you an accurate reflection on what the savings are going to be. And also, the tricky thing with logistics is obviously it's all about volume. Like, all your benefit comes from the more you have happening, the more options there are to pull levers. Like, the more movements you're doing, the better rates you're going to get with transport providers. So just doing one Audi brand, for example, at a group isn't going to give you that view of what you could actually achieve. So yeah, we go group wide, couple of month trials, and then we can work out with the group what the forward looking position is.
And how much kind of heavy lifting, how is that whole onboarding process?
It's actually really simple. I mean, we take a stock feed from the dealer management system, which was something that really scared us before we started Jigcar, but it turns out they're actually set up to do that really well, so that's very easy. And then we basically, the main piece of setup is we set up the transport providers and the internal drivers in Jigcar. So transport providers receive movements through the platform, and they update the status of them in the platform, and that nukes all the email back and forth. So we have to do a probably 30-minute setup call with each transport provider. But typically we're saying to a group, even if you're massive, you only want 2 or 3 transport providers. You don't need any more than that. So that's pretty simple. And we help with the negotiation around their rates and, what is the best setup for the group, and we can bring providers to the table. And then internal drivers, we've actually built a mobile app, but it is only in a browser. So you get a text, opens the browser, so you don't need to download anything. So there's probably like a couple of meetings that happen on that side, and then we just do one 30-minute rollout call with all sales managers, basically anyone that's going to request a movement. And for them, it is so simple. You just go to Jigcar and you click request movement and click a piece of stock and move it, and Jigcar tells you which of the resources that the group has decided you should use. So it's quite simple. So we tend to say, give us a week, 2 weeks to have those conversations, and then we can do the rollout, but it's not really heavy lifting.
That's incredibly light touch. It's really impressive, and I love the way that you've approached it. And because I think that is always the challenge, isn't it? That sort of really steep kind of onboarding kind of curve that you often find when you're trying to help businesses transform and optimize their business processes and so on.
Yeah, definitely. I think the heavier touch for us is right now you're up and running. It's it's not like you roll out Jigcar and then you've got the most optimized transport setup. There are benefits that come from putting Jigcar in place, but the first main benefit is you're actually getting a view of what's happening today, and then it's working with you to sometimes quite drastically change your transport model. In other cases, it's tweaking it, but often it's actually really changing it. You need new providers, or you need to streamline your providers down, or maybe you do more on subcontracted drivers, or maybe you want to go more in-house or less in-house. And so for us, it's the every 2 weeks, every month, check in with our transport director, who was head of logistics with us at Kazoo, and really like diving deep into the data. That is quite a heavy lift, to be honest, but we have to do that in the first year because that's how you see the true value of optimizing your transport.
That's a great segue into my next question, which was about harnessing the massive amount of data, because obviously what you've got is not just the data for that dealership, but you've got the aggregated data across your entire client base, right? So I guess you can anonymize, aggregate that, and really use that in terms of helping to drive those optimization insights.
Definitely. I think one of the things we see in this industry is cars are moving an insane amount. Every dealer group is moving loads and loads of cars if you've got multiple sites, and typically cars are moving one by one. So an individual picks up a car and moves it in one go. There is very little consolidation, very little bulk movements that's happening. And if you think about another industry, if you think about Amazon, imagine them moving parcels between their hubs in little vans, in little batches. It'd just be insane.
One at a time. Yeah.
Yeah. Obviously they have the biggest trucks you've ever seen, and they put as many parcels in them as possible, and they run routes every single day, and through that they increase speed, they reduce cost. And so one of the things we're able to do is when we look across the Jigcar network of all the dealer groups on our platform and their sites, we start to see that there are routes that a transport provider who has bulk movement capacity can run. And they could probably put a truck on a Jigcar route every single day, and the cost of moving a car would change from £140 one by one that the dealer group's currently doing to £65-70. And that's massive. And so that's the journey we're now on, is now we're building up our network of sites, is bringing these big providers to the table and saying, you could actually put a truck on this route, it'll be full every single day. And for the dealer, that's going to save you, 50% on your transport cost. So that's the direction we're going in.
I love it. And effectively everybody's winning from that. It's
Everyone.
And particularly at a time like this when the industry is under huge pressures, right? This is a fantastic unlock.
Exactly. And where the smaller providers that move cars one by one are really useful is the fleet deliveries, the B2C deliveries, the ad hoc movements that need to happen where you can't consolidate. So there is very much a place for them, and we're still bringing more business to them because fleet volumes are just going through the roof because it's so hard to sell new cars retail these days. So it's just about using the right provider for the right type of movement, and that isn't an equation that's really happening today, which we're trying to support.
And when you look at kind of where you are on your sort of roadmap, give me a sense of kind of what's next. Where are you taking this? I mean, you mentioned earlier on about sort of new kind of products and so on. Your customers are still at various stages of their journey with you, but also you as a business. So give me kind of a little bit of the flavor of that.
Yes, there's two core products that we are that we are working on now. One we've got in testing at the moment, which we're really excited about, is called Autoplan TMS. It's a transport management system. This is actually the product we put into a prototype and took around dealers initially, and they were like, too much for us. But it's really relevant to any dealer group that has their own trucks and drivers, or transport providers that move their own cars, or manufacturers. And it's about, how do you get as many cars as possible on your own trucks? How do you get a driver to do as many drops as possible in a day if you're planning centrally as a central transport team? How do you make sure your truck does the best route? It's just a classic logistics product specifically for automotive. Really excited about that. And then the product we're working on in the background, which we're going to launch later this year, is called stock placement. And that is about basically taking data to say, right, what is actually the best location to put this car in to reduce days to sell and maximize margin, and linking that back to the ability to actually move it there. So you've got like the data-driven approach of, this is the car you need, and then this is where that car should actually be across your 40 sites. Or if a car's not selling at this site, instead of buying another one over here, actually move that one. Or you've got, stock imbalances, and then the ability to actually move it. So make suggestions to the people who are allowed to approve those movements to happen, really help those central stock teams or sales managers to make those decisions. And we are really, really excited by that product, but it's only really powerful when you can actually bake in the data with the ability to actually move the car. Because we find in automotive, there are just so many BI dashboards, so much data, but it's very hard to do anything with it because it's not linked to anything operational. So we've gone, the other approach we've taken really is solve the operational stuff and then get data that can power it.
That's a really smart way of describing what you're doing. And is that kind of really where the bulk of the investment is going that you've just raised?
Yeah, it really is on those two products. And, there's so much still to do in the UK. So yeah, as I said, we've got 8 of the AM100 groups, but there's another 82 for us to go after, which is the core focus. But also looking at rental and manufacturers, and we've just hired someone in France to start scoping out the French market as well, which we think is a big opportunity. Huge distances between sites, 3 times the number of franchise sites in France as the UK, but there aren't that many more people. So our assumption is there are way more movements happening over way bigger distances, big opportunity, and it seems that is the case. But the primary focus remains the UK dealer market.
That's really interesting. I was going to ask you about sort of the international kind of opportunity, for you. Obviously, you've got a lot still to do here in the UK, and that sounds great. And I think that example of France, and the sort of the European kind of scale in terms of geographic kind of scale, challenge, opportunity, I suppose. Where is the rest of the world in terms of its level of maturity when it comes to kind of moving cars?
I think we're seeing it sort of 80-20, the 80-20 rule of like 80% of companies are doing the same thing globally. There are some nuances in some markets where there is slightly different dealer model, but we think globally the automotive industry is underserved in terms of technology for moving vehicles and parts, which is a future thing for us. So we think it's, especially when we look across Western Europe, that there are big opportunities. In America, there is just more software generally in the US, but everyone who has looked at solving the transport problem has come at it from the view of a marketplace. I'm going to aggregate some providers and I'm going to provide a booking portal to book movements on, which is great. That's a good way to actually move a car. But if I'm a dealer group moving thousands of cars a year, is that going to give me the visibility on what the best transport strategy is for me, or how much I'm spending, or how do I stop cars moving 4 times, or how do I stop cars moving back to sites that have already been moved to? No. So, we sort of hook into those marketplaces. We're building an integration with MoveX at the moment, but we don't find that there is anyone really doing that piece that we're doing. So long answer to your question, but yeah, I think big opportunity globally.
Brilliant. Let's talk about the team. And you mentioned, the fact that you sort of, you have co-founders, and tell me a little bit about kind of how you think about sort of, building kind of a team to scale, and perhaps organizationally you've talked about a number of key roles that you've been hiring recently, so we'd love to kind of know more about that.
Yeah, so we, our thoughts on team is that I think one of the things that startups do, and which can be a bit dangerous, is you just have a really young, hungry team, but you forget that you need people from the industry to be able to get the most out of that young hungriness. And so what we try and do is make sure that we have, the software skills, but also the automotive retail skills, and for us, the logistics skills. So the first people that joined the team were John, our commercial director, who was sales director for Nissan for 10 years, and went on to be global head of sales for McLaren Aston Martin. Has spent his whole career in automotive on the OEM side, and it's just been completely invaluable to us in terms of understanding the industry. And Simon, our chairman, has been CEO or COO of 3 of the AM100 groups. He was COO of Hendy before. And so having those people around us has just been absolutely critical. And as we build out the team, we will continue to have people that have worked in automotive that understand how a dealer group or a manufacturer or a rental group operates. And then the other side is the transport experience. So as I mentioned, James, our transport director, who was head of logistics at Kazoom, was at Wincanton before, which is like a competitor to DHL, running projects for sort of Asda, etc. So for us, when we expand the team, it's really about thinking, like, what products are we trying to build? What problems are we trying to solve? And we don't just need engineers to solve that problem. We need people that actually have faced that problem day-to-day operationally. We need people that understand the industry, and it's making sure we basically solve for all of those things as we grow. So that's now the focus post-funding round, is who are the great people that have those pieces of experience that can help us, and ultimately that are better than us as founders. We need to hire people better than us. That's critical.
Love it. I love that. That's such a great piece of advice. What about the culture? Tell me about the culture at Jigcar.
The culture of Jigcar. It's a good question. I think it's, we're still a small company. I think we're 7 full-time employees, but the one thing that has been interesting being a founder rather than an employee is your view on what shapes culture. And this is probably quite cliche, and I think anyone who has built a company will probably say this is blindingly obvious, but as an employee, you read those 5 values on a piece of paper, and you think this is the culture, where actually culture sort of develops naturally. It happens from who you hire, just because they're the kind of people that you think are right for the business, and how you operate day to day. And I think there are a couple of things that are sort of showing already in our early stage. One of the things is the fact we're very product focused. So even the engineers we've hired, I hear them getting on the phone to a customer and saying, "Oh, I saw this didn't work," or "I need this piece of information from you." And they're very much thinking about how do people actually use this, rather than, "Oh, I'm writing some code." And the other thing for us that really stands out, I think, is pragmatism. We can't boil the ocean. We need to move quickly. It's about like delivering something that's really good, that helps our users, but not over engineering it to the point that it's not actually adding any value. It's only adding like 0.5% worth of value after that. So I think those 2 things for us are standing out: so having a product focused mind, and also being quite pragmatic without being reckless.
And I think that idea of an engineer picking up the phone and talking to a customer, again, if I was on the other end of that call, I would be delighted that that care and consideration and was being kind of demonstrated to me. So you're no doubt building great kind of loyalty there. Tell me about, so we talked a little bit about sort of the impact you're having for your customers and on the industry. Tell me about kind of like some of the kind of really key kind of metrics that you sort of almost live by as a team.
Yeah, so basically we have 2 metrics as a business. One is obviously revenue, and that's obviously quite important. But on a product level and sort of customer happiness level, it's all about usage. So every single day we're checking 2 things. It's number of movements that all of our customers are putting through the platform across their different sites. So make sure it's like group wide adoption. And the other one is the number of users that are coming into the platform, and making sure they're not just requesting movements. Like, are they looking at what's actually happening? Are they checking the status of the movement? Like, are we adding value beyond just clicking a button saying request movement? And that is really, really important to us, because we're not just trying to help people request movements more easily. That is actually a huge value add to a sales manager, because they want to sell cars and not be on the phone to transport providers or whoever trying to work out when the hell this car is going to move there. But it really is about also showing those other pieces of information so you can make sure that you have a really efficient operation. So yeah, it's those two core things really: users, how they're interacting, and number of movements.
It's amazing to me when I think about sort of, how young your business is and how fast and far you've come already. And I guess kind of thinking about kind of like starting a business today, you're operating in a kind of, social, mobile, AI, cloud kind of world, right? And there aren't that many businesses that are alive today, certainly scaling at the speed you are, that kind of, have that kind of almost sort of set of kind of fundamentals that are kind of just baked into kind of the very beginning of the business. Tell me a little bit about kind of some of the other major trends that you sort of see kind of in the coming years, and they may well be linked to some of those principles.
Yeah, I think like having just done an investment round, just speaking to these investors and these like venture capitalists who are hearing every day of these crazy like AI agents doing different things in different industries, and I'm trying to pare it back and say, I know that's what you're hearing every day, but we're moving people off whiteboards. That people are planning movements on their drivers on a whiteboard because that is the most efficient way you can do it today. And we're talking about emails, phone calls. And so that was quite a painful thing, actually, is, you're raising for a slightly different type of business to the, I'm building an AI agent that does this, that does that. But ultimately, we do see that in our journey, and we see that in automotive over the next few years. But you can't leverage AI without data. And there was no transport data. So that's now what we're building. And then we can build the infrastructure on top for basically, we see the concept of a transport planner that's a sort of AI agent that's making decisions about which is the best resource to move a car on in terms of cost and speed, or the priority, whatever the priority is for that movement. And we see the industry going there. And that's what we're trying to do. And yeah, so I hate to say it sounds really cliche, but I do see these AI agents playing out across automotive. In some parts of the business, they can already happen. In parts like ours, they'll come, but maybe not today.
I think it's really interesting, and that almost linked back to your point around operational data, right? Because you can have, what's the point of having an agent if they can't actually can't operate?
Yeah, exactly. And I think one of the things the industry that's tough in the industry, because you have to hire so many people, is being able to hire people with a specific expertise in certain domains. And so it's not an easy task if you want to build a central logistics team, for example. You have to hire someone to run that team, or people in that team who are logistics experts. If you're building a team of buyers, they need to have expertise to be able to buy the right cars. And so the pool of people you can hire just really slims down. You ideally need them to have automotive and logistics experience, or automotive and stock buying experience. Whereas what tools like Jigcar are going to enable is for you to hire someone that doesn't have that experience, but can do that job, and less of them, really, because the platform can basically take a lot of the thinking away and can help you manage a much bigger operation with less people as well.
And looking forward, you've sort of plotted somewhat of a future kind of vision in this conversation, but let's just say that we're sitting down again in a couple of years' time. Tell me kind of what Jigcar looks like at that point.
I think ultimately what we're trying to do is, on the retailer side, is build the ultimate platform for turning your stock as quickly as possible. And that is across both cars and parts. But parts we won't touch until probably 2026, but there are huge opportunities there. There's, thousands of parts vans going, running around every single day that, don't have software to optimize their routes and maximize how many jobs can get done in a day. So that's obviously a next step for us. So I think if all goes well in a few years' time, it's about like the main infrastructure for moving and, the operation behind selling cars and parts, with probably quite a heavy European focus. So the UK, France, Germany, Spain as as the next core markets, and maybe one day the US, but we're European centric to start with.
Great. And if you were going to give one piece of advice to perhaps, an aspiring founder who's listening to this conversation, what would that be?
Oof, I still feel like I'm pretty early in my journey to give much advice, but I think for me, I mean, I had a business before that was very small, and I knew I always wanted to start something else, and so I went and had a bunch of jobs like at Kazoo, and my whole time I would spend fiddling on the side, and I knew deep down this was the journey I wanted to go on, and I also knew I needed to find the thing I wanted to invest my life in. But I did get to that point. I knew what that thing was. I knew it was this, and I spent way too long with one foot trying to do this and one foot trying to build a career, and I was doing them both pretty averagely. And so my one piece of advice would be, if you think that's something you want to do, you think you know what it is, just commit. And sometimes that means taking a step back to go forward, like take the salary cut like we did, and we still do, and make that, because it is worth it. If that's what you want to do, it's worth it. So yeah, it's probably just commit and be happy going backwards to go forwards.
And I have to ask you, tell us the story behind the name. How did you come up with it?
Yeah, good question. We were initially called My Cargo, with a K, but there was another company called Cargo who had the domain mycargo.com, so we were mycargo.co. And when we raised our first round, we were called My Cargo. And then one of the people who invested in the business did this post about how I've just invested in My Cargo and posted about the wrong company. And we thought, if they are going to get this wrong, imagine what our customers are going to do. So we changed the name. And I think it was a moment on the tube where I was messaging my co-founders and had this sort of basically like moving stock around like pieces of a puzzle, like a jigsaw. And so I sent something along the lines of Jigcar, and then Rupert, my co-founder, came back with, what about actually Jigcar? And then he sent a screenshot of the domain being free, jigcar.com. And it was in that moment we were like, boom, done, that's it. But it was a horrible process those few weeks, and we had some terrible name ideas, which, yeah, I'm not even going to mention.
I think it's a great name. It's really memorable, and I'm so glad you changed it. Elliot, listen, thank you so much for your time today. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you for joining us on Leap Forward.
Thanks, Justin. Really appreciate it.